The 1970s was a decade that produced some of America's best films, music, and TV shows. The 1970s TV shows were particularly representative of the era. Contrasting with shows of the 50s and 60s, the 70s TV shows presented more mature characters, challenging storylines, and provocative humor. 70s TV shows also informed American audiences of what was going on in the country and the world. Join Facts Verse as we learn about the most watched TV series of the 1970s. 1970 to 71, Marcus Welby MD. Marcus Welby MD followed Dr. Marcus Welby and his assistant Stephen Kiley as they cared for their patients in an age of cynicism and in a profession that requires coldness. Dr. Welby was on a first-name basis with his patients and showed them compassion. The medical drama series starred Robert Young and James Brolin. Elena Verdugo played their nurse, Consuelo Lopez. While the show wasn't remarkably different from most medical dramas, in this show the elder doctor, Marcus Welby, was the compassionate and friendly doctor, while the young one, Stephen, had a more cold and serious approach to his profession. What made the show stand out is that it wasn't afraid to depict many illnesses and scenarios that previous generations of TV creators were too afraid to show on television. This included episodes where Dr. Marcus Welby helped treat mononucleosis, teenage obesity, sexually transmitted diseases, learning disabilities, painkiller addiction, and even sexual assault victims. While we've become used to seeing graphic medical procedures and discussions on TV today, this was relatively rare before the 70s. Marcus Welby MD was a pioneer in this regard and wasn't afraid to depict the real illnesses and suffering that plagued the country. There were a few episodes that caused a massive controversy. One dealt with abortion, which didn't air in Mexico due to the stigma towards abortion at the time. The other episode, The Other Martin Loring, attracted controversy as it showed a middle-aged homosexual patient who was urged to resist his sexual urges by Dr. Welby. There was also an episode called The Outrage, in which a teenage boy was molested by his homosexual teacher, which did in fact cause major outrage among LGBT viewers and activist groups. The episode wasn't aired on several networks, and it was the first time a TV episode didn't air due to protests. There were also several sponsors who refused to show their ads during breaks for this episode. The show was canceled in 1976 after running for 169 episodes. While there were a few episodes that upset viewers, it remains one of the most watched 1970s shows of all time. Before we tell you more about the most watched 70s shows, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First for more. 1971 to 76, All in the Family. It should come as no surprise to any fan of 70s TV that All in the Family was one of the most watched shows of the decade. But the show was so popular, it was the most watched TV show from 1971 to 76. All in the Family wasn't an ordinary sitcom. It stood in sharp contrast with most sitcoms of the 50s and 60s that strived to depict an idyllic version of American life. All in the Family wasn't afraid to have a character who, at times, was unsympathetic and who all the time was politically incorrect. The show didn't hesitate to discuss some of the dark subject matter that characterized this decade and American life in general. The show followed the irascible Archie Bunker and his family. Played by Carroll O'Connor, Archie was a working-class American who loved the traditional values of America and wasn't afraid to express his opinion on the changing liberal attitudes that were becoming popular. The show often discussed dark topics using humor. These included polarizing issues like sexual assault, homosexuality and gay rights, women's liberation and feminism, abortion, religion, the Vietnam War, and race relations. While it must have been a huge risk to create such a show, All in the Family is a testament to great art. The show's popularity showed that American audiences were mature enough to enjoy a sitcom that wasn't afraid to tackle difficult subjects, all while peppering the dialogue with politically incorrect language. The show remained the most watched TV series for 6 years straight. It's no wonder President Nixon discussed the show in the now infamous Watergate tapes, and that Archie and Edith's chairs can be found in the Smithsonian. 1976 to 77, Happy Days. Of course, the 70s wasn't just about discussing dark themes. It was also a time of nostalgia towards the 1950s, which has often been depicted as a nicer, more innocent, and idyllic time. The most watched TV show from 76 to 77 was Happy Days, which harkened back to the Midwestern USA from the 50s and 60s. The show starred Ron Howard, who was now grown up and moving on from his Opie character from The Andy Griffith Show. It also helped launch the career of Henry Winkler, who played Arthur Herbert Fonzarelli, better known as the Fonz. While it initially didn't catch on with audiences, the show's creator, Gary Marshall, made Fonzie a more prominent character in the third season. Audiences fell in love with the rebellious and laid-back character, played brilliantly brilliantly by Henry Winkler. The show became so popular that one of Fonzie's leather jackets is displayed at the Smithsonian. It should also be noted that the now famous character of Mork, played by Robin Williams, debuted on Happy Days. It's ironic that one of the most watched 70s TV shows was set in the previous 2 decades, but as the 1970s brought many scandals and uncertainties in America, it was perhaps the show American audiences needed the most. 1977 to 79, Laverne and Shirley. One of the most popular spin-offs from Happy Days followed 2 friends who worked as bottle cappers at the Schatz Brewery in Milwaukee. Like Happy Days, the show took place during the 50s and 60s. From 1977 to 79, American TV belonged to Laverne and Shirley. It became the most watched TV series in America beginning in its 3rd season. It ran for a total of 8 and garnered 6 Golden Globe nominations and 1 Emmy nomination. Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams played Laverne and Shirley on Happy Days. When the spin-off was announced, Cindy Williams was initially not interested. Another actress, Liberty Williams, auditioned for the role of Shirley, but TV executive Michael Eisner hid Liberty's demo reel from other execs. As such, they insisted Cindy Williams reprise her role. She did, and Laverne and Shirley became popular for being one of the major sitcoms that was female-led. This complemented another popular sitcom of the 70s, Maude, which also had a female protagonist. American women weren't always at the forefront of stories set in the 50s or 60s. Laverne and Shirley followed in the footsteps of popular actresses like Lucille Ball and Donna Reed. It's considered a classic today and often thought of as one of America's most underrated sitcoms. 1979, 60 Minutes wrapped up the decade. The popularity of Laverne and Shirley was a great way to end the 70s. It gave American audiences a chance to look back with nostalgia on a more innocent time. But the final year of the 70s showed Americans didn't always want to use their television sets to escape reality. In fact, it was the preferred medium for Americans to get informed about what was happening in the country and the world. 60 Minutes became the most watched TV series in 1979. It premiered in '68, but really became a crucial part of American television at the end of the 70s. It covered the most popular news stories of the time and had groundbreaking interviews with famous personalities. While not as popular as it was in the 70s and early 80s, 60 Minutes remains one of the most popular TV news programs. One of the most entertaining and most watched episodes from 1979 was a report that looked at The Muppet Show behind the scenes. There was also a fascinating report on video piracy. 60 Minutes is an institution in itself, and the end of the 70s showed that Americans were eager to be informed about what was going on. Now it's time to hear from you. Do you think these shows deserve their popularity as the most watched 70s TV shows? Let us know in the comments section below.